Our reading today is from the sermon that was delivered at the Service of the Living Tradition in Pittsburgh at our General Assembly by the Reverend Chris Busey. And before I do the reading, I'm going to sing a little bit of the text that he used for his sermon. Change is coming. What do we need to imagine? Change is coming. What do we need to imagine? I know from brokenness there's hope. I know from brokenness there's hope. Change is coming. What do we need to imagine? Change is coming. What do we need to imagine? Churches, he said, are not always known for rapid change. 19th century Unitarians believed in the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, and the neighborhood of Boston. But that was before God changed her pronouns. Our theology has changed over time. Unitarians and Universalists and Unitarian Universalists, our ideas of our neighborhood are much bigger now. Our ideas about our human family and all life are much bigger now. Our ideas about ultimate reality are much bigger now. In so much as God is embodied, there is a divine spark in every body in this room. Every body of every color, every body of every age, every body of every race, every body of every sexual orientation, every body of gender identity, every body of every size, every body is divine. Change is coming. What do we need to imagine? Oh yes, my friends, change was the unofficial theme of General Assembly 2023 in Pittsburgh. And for those of you who may not know, which is probably a lot of you, the Unitarian Universalist congregation at Willamette Falls, this church, is part of a denominational organization called the Unitarian Universalist Association. And the UUA conducts its business at a General Assembly, a gathering of delegates from Unitarian Universalist congregations from around the country and the world who meet the third full week in June to worship and attend workshops and debate and vote on the business of the association. This was a big year. This year we elected a new president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, the Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt, who is a Gen X queer Afro-Latina Unitarian Universalist theologian, and who will be a powerful voice for collective care and liberation within our movement and in the larger world. We also voted on the first complete revision to Article 2, which is the document that is now our 7 principles and 6 sources. And in our bylaws are a list of our common purposes. Those have been in place since 1985. And as a living tradition, we don't believe in the finality of Scripture. We don't believe that something that got written 2,000 years ago is exactly the way it should be right now. Instead, we believe that our values grow as human wisdom and the teaching of science and our collective understanding grows. And that's a good thing, because as written in 1961, our principles included things like, in accordance with these corporate purposes, the members of the Unitarian Universalist Association, dedicated to the principles of a free faith, unite in seeking, for example, to cherish and spread the universal truths taught by the great prophets and teachers of humanity in every age and tradition, immemorially summarized in the Judeo-Christian heritage as love to God and love to man, to affirm, promote, and defend the supreme worth of every human personality, the dignity of man, and the use of the democratic method in human relationships, and to encourage cooperation with men of goodwill in every land. And 100 years ago, as Reverend Busey shared in our reading, it was the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. We can do better. Now, our 7 principles are beloved by many of us, and they will not go away. We do not need to tear down our sign. It doesn't mean that we don't still believe those things. But it is also true that the actual 7 principles don't come rolling off the tongue terribly easily. Right? And nowhere in them is what most Unitarian Universalists consider to be central to our theology, the idea of an abiding love that we endeavor to embody and make manifest in the world. And so an appointed commission of Unitarian Universalists, ministers and lay people diverse in age and gender and race and ability status, surveyed 10,000 Unitarian Universalists at General Assemblies and through affinity groups and congregations, and came up with a draft proposal last fall that was workshopped, and suggestions were made, and some changes were made. And then it was brought to this year's General Assembly. And of course, because we are Unitarian Universalists, we felt the need to amend it. There were 82 amendments proposed. Delegates who were interested met before General Assembly and prioritized the amendments because we could not consider 82 amendments. And so during the business meeting, we considered 15 of them that the delegates thought were the most important and the ones that were the most representative of the changes they wanted to see. Each amendment got an official 9 minutes of discussion, actual people speaking to or against that particular amendment. That was led by the person who had proposed the amendment. They got the first chance to speak in favor of it. The commission, if they wanted to speak against it, was allowed to speak next, or they said they had no objection to the amendment. And then others, in-person or online delegates, had the chance to speak at pro and con mics, taking turns. In the past, before COVID, at these General Assemblies, we all voted with orange cards that we all held up in the middle of this hall of approximately 2,000 or 3,000 people. Ushers with their striped aprons and little clickers went by and clicked and counted all of these votes. Now, in an effort to be more inclusive with folks who serve as delegates virtually, the vote isn't open until after the session is over, and then it stays open until 10 o'clock local time, and people vote online or with their smartphones. And if you are a person that is not a comfortable thing for, you can go over to the nice people in the convention hall, and they will help you vote on their computers. I liked this new way of voting and having the opportunity to reflect on each thing and to reflect on them together instead of having to vote on one and then another one and then another one all separately. Some of the amendments that were proposed included adding the 7 principles back in. 2 amendments were proposed to include the 6 sources in the new document. But the commission stated that these documents would always be part of our history. They aren't disappearing. They will be part of our history. They're in our hymnals. They're in our signage. They will be a part of us. But the delegates followed the advice of the commission and didn't amend the proposal to include them. In fact, I was rather surprised that of the 15 proposed amendments that were considered, the 5 that the commission didn't object to were the 5 that passed, and none others passed. I know that there were delegates who came to General Assembly or joined online who were absolutely set that they were going to vote against this proposal no matter what, And I honestly worried that it wouldn't pass given some of the animosity that I heard before folks had had a chance to listen to any of the discussion. And so I was really grateful that the delegates really heard the work that the commission did to come up with an inclusive process that allowed for change and what we need to imagine to move forward as a denomination. Article 2 needed approval of 50% of the delegates to move forward. That was not guaranteed. The last time there was a vote to revise Article 2, it failed by 13 votes. This time it passed with over 86% of the votes. That will lead us into another year of study in our congregations. It is possible that during that year of study, more amendments will be put forward by either the Unitarian Universalist Association Board of Trustees or several congregations working in concert, but the bar for amendments next year is much higher. Next year, in what is planned as an all-online General Assembly, delegates will vote on Article 2. Next year, it will require a 2/3 majority for passage. And if it passes, then Article 2 will change. I will preach more on what that new Article 2 looks like in a sermon in the park on August 20th. It is going to be a family-friendly service using the new thing that I just think is absolutely brilliant. If you've heard me speak about Article 2 before, you'll know that the 6 values are kind of represented by petals with love in the center. But the Unitarian Universalist congregation in York, Pennsylvania got creative with an anagram maker and came up with JETPIG. JETPIG, justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, generosity, fueled by love. We'll talk about JETPIG on August 20th. The other major business resolution this year was a proposal brought by the youth and young adults of General Assembly that would have required the Unitarian Universalist Association to completely divest from fossil fuels and fossil fuel infrastructure, with the amount divested to be used as reparations to those injured by fossil fuels. The youth were organized and passionate with sing-alongs for divestment and a short protest that interrupted the business meeting for about 5 minutes. They were so good. They came in with their signs and they took over, but they kept it to 5 minutes and then they filed out nicely. Most people, including the treasurer of the board and both the outgoing and ingoing president, thank you so much, Richard, I really appreciate that, agreed in principle with divestment, but explained that the actual proposal would cost the Unitarian Universalist Association $14 million and would prevent us from the actions of socially responsible investing that we've been following for several years. That measure failed 68% to 32%. It was the closest vote at this General Assembly. Other noteworthy events at this GA included passing 3 actions of immediate witness, one supporting the Dreamers and offering a path to permanent residency, one organizing for health equity, particularly in regards to reproductive health, and finally one attempting to stop a large new police training facility outside Atlanta, Georgia that would damage the environment there. Another of the most meaningful parts of General Assembly for me was the Reverend Cecilia Kingman. She is from Portland, and she gave the Berry Street Lecture. The Berry Street Lecture is given at Ministry Days, which is the 2 days before General Assembly. It is the longest running essay series in the United States. It has been going for 204 years, I think. And Reverend Cecilia Kingman's essay was entitled, "My Little Pony Was Right, Reflections of Fascism Within and Without." And she spoke really movingly about the techniques of fascism, highlighting and quoting them from Jason Stanley's work. Stanley is the author of How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them, and is a professor and scholar of philosophy and propaganda at Yale. He describes fascism as an ideology, but also, and maybe more importantly, as a political method. Not all who use fascist tactics are ideologically fascist. We recognize fascists less by their beliefs than by their methods. I am quoting Cecilia, quoting Jason Stanley, and I am also going to put these in my words to the extent that I can, so I just want to explain that. So the first tactic is a mythic past. The idea that fascists always present the idea that there was a glorious past. In politics, this is presented as the idea that we were once a great nation. Some of this will probably sound really familiar. Notice the past tense. And when we were great, the dominant racial group ruled over all of the others. But now that has been taken away. It hasn't been lost by our own actions, but it has been taken away by some group designated as the other. The next tactic is propaganda. All social movements and all politics uses propaganda to persuade. Fascist propaganda, however, makes a real distinction between friends and enemies. There are us and there are them. And the other, them, are a threat, and they are fundamentally opposed to the greatness of our nation. Tactic number 3 is anti-intellectualism. Authoritarianism presents a cult of the leader. In a fascist system, the leader and only the leader sets the rules about what is true or what is false. Tactic number 4 is creating a type of unreality. The idea that there isn't a truth, but that everyone is lying and lies don't matter because what is truth anyway? The 5th tactic of fascism is hierarchy, which is absolutely central to fascism. It is the big lie at the center of things: white supremacy, male supremacy, able-bodied supremacy, these lines that assign people superiority and the privileges and benefits that go with that superiority. And hierarchy goes right into victimhood. Once you have convinced people that they are justifiably higher in the hierarchy, then you convince them that they are victims of equality. Anybody remember those no special rights bumper stickers? Anybody remember those? Is getting married a special right? No. But fascists tell people that equality is making them lose their rightful place or power. The 7th tactic of fascism is law and order. Under fascism, the definition of law-abiding means loyalty to the dominant group. Members of the dominant group, by their very nature, are seen as law-abiding, and everyone else is seen as law-breaking. This is why even peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters were often viewed as not law-abiding. Tactic number 8 is sexual anxiety. In every case, across different cultural and historical settings, the fascist leader will always say, "Your women and your children are under threat. You need a strong man to protect your families." Fascists make conservatives overwhelmingly terrified of transgender rights and gay and lesbian and bisexual people and their families. According to fascists, these targeted groups are not just trying to peacefully live their own lives, but they are trying to groom your children. Stanley calls the 9th tactic of fascism Sodom and Gomorrah. And unlike what we think of Sodom and Gomorrah, which it sort of goes into the sexual anxiety piece, in this case, they rest on kind of an urban-rural divide. The hardworking rural folks are the good, pure people of the world, and those inner-city voters or urban voters are the people that fascists are seeking to control or eliminate, or at least make sure their votes don't count. And the final thing is the idea, Stanley, who was a child of Holocaust survivors, and I don't speak German, so I'm not going to try that, but the slogan that was over the arches at Auschwitz, which is "Work shall make you free." And fascists create an idea that minorities and immigrants and others are lazy. This is what starts the idea of working for your welfare benefits, of forced labor, prison labor, work requirements for any type of benefits, the targeted groups must provide free labor as a supposed moral education. Cecilia Kingman writes, "My friends, there is a specific reason why we are seeing a focused attack on trans rights at this moment. It is because under fascism, difference cannot be allowed to flourish, because difference is a form of freedom, and freedom of human expression must be suppressed. Fascists attempt to keep everyone within the narrow roles prescribed to us and will punish or eliminate anyone who deviates. It is crucial to understand this. Attacks on trans folks are an intentional opening salvo and first target of this round of fascist organizing. In addition to hating any kind of free self-expression, fascists also always try out their tactics on the most vulnerable group. They believe, often rightly, that other people will not act to protect the most vulnerable, especially when they identify a difference that is misunderstood or even generally reviled. Right now, fascists are gauging the public's response. But if you think they are going to stop with trans people, you are really, really, really mistaken. They will see what the public allows and increase that to broader and broader groups of people. We've seen it before. It'll happen again if we don't stop it. The overwhelming theme of this General Assembly was the idea of embracing change. Not just change for change's sake, but change that might move us into a bit of discomfort in an effort to become a faith that doesn't die out like so many mainline Protestant churches in America are doing right now. Instead, moves us into the future by centering the voices of young people and Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and queer and trans and non-binary people. Centering other voices doesn't mean that the voices that have traditionally held sway don't get heard. Instead, it means that those aren't the only ones we hear anymore. It is time to become a broader, more inclusive faith, one that fits the needs of everyone. I am excited for that journey, and I hope that you are too. Blessed be, and amen.